we are going to have this debate with Stefan Ziegler, who is the producer of the movie and the owner of Advocacy Productions, with Caroline Alberman, who is an international lawyer working in Switzerland and abroad. And Caroline has been also the legal advisor for the movie. And finally, of course, the filmmaker, Mohammed Alatar. So I'd like to, before giving the floor to the public, I'd like to ask a few questions to each of you. And maybe to begin with the producer, because this film, some way, is half Palestinian and half Swiss. With all due respect to the work of the filmmaker, I say half and half because actually I met Stefan several years ago. I was coming back to Switzerland. I'd been working in Palestine from 2001 and 2007, and then a few times afterwards he was leaving to Palestine because he was working for the Swiss-American Cooperation that had rented him to UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestine refugees. And he was particularly in charge for monitoring the impact of the building of the wall on the Palestinian communities and the refugee Palestinian communities in particular on the other side of the wall. So Stefan, through that work, progressively matured the idea of, you wanted to do something about that, which was not just the work of monitoring, but something more. So maybe we need to hear your story for the project.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for still being with us. Maybe just a correction. I was monitoring through UNRWA the humanitarian impacts of the wall, not of the building of the wall. Something that most people can't conceive of because it's very difficult to monitor something dead. It's difficult to monitor how people do things, but a wall. Okay, sorry. All right. So I was monitoring the humanitarian impacts. That's my bread and butter job. I'm a humanitarian by heart and certainly also by soul. So when my project in 2013 came to an end, seemingly the world was no longer interested in seeing what kind of impacts there are. As we saw in the film, the ICJ opinion had not taken any effect whatsoever. Well, I kind of decided I'm going home now. I've had it 9 years in the West Bank. I think I spent only a few years more living in this country ever. So it became my second home in a sense, the 50% in a sense. But I think what's important is that the project itself, the film, came out of a need to tell the story and to keep this discourse alive. As our colleagues from Palestine said so importantly tonight, it's to keep that alive, okay? Otherwise, what? No discourse, no wall, no occupation, no Palestinians. That's the consequences. So that's how I approached Mohammed, and the rest maybe he wants to tell us, okay? Thank you.
Yeah, by the way, I thank Stefan because he introduced me in 2014 to Mohammed. At the time I was beginning my project on memory, violence and cinema. So we met while he was, well, first of all, Mohammed Alatar is a Palestinian filmmaker with Jordanian passport as well. Mohammed is the author of two other important documentaries. The first one was The Iron Wall, which is dealing with the illegal settlements, the colonies in the West Bank. And the second wonderful documentary, Jerusalem, the East Side Story, which came up a few years after. By the way, the two movies are on free access. You Google on YouTube, you put Mohammed Alatar, The Iron Wall, or Jerusalem, the East Side Story, and the movies are free to be viewed, watched. Yes, Mohammed. When Stefan suggested you to work on this project, how you reacted, how you shaped it or reshaped it, because it's never easy, I mean, as a filmmaker or as a producer, to come together with a perfectly unified project. Or I mean, I imagine all the discussions you had and how you yourself, through this movie, you expressed something that is in continuity with your former movies or something new.
Thank you, Riccardo. Well, first, I believe it or not, I probably didn't get the chance to say that to Stefan. But I really, before that, me and Stefan, when we were working on this project, we kind of almost killed each other. We're both very competitive people, and we disagreed almost where the sun will shine. But at the same time, I really want to thank him from the bottom of my heart, because if it wasn't for him, you would not see this film. He was courageous enough to put his own money. This film was 100% financed by his own money. And when he approached me in the...
Which doesn't mean that he is a millionaire, huh?
Well, just buy the DVD so he would get his money back. So when he, I mean, he was there before, and we used to, go to lots of party, and I won't talk about this. So when he called me, he said, "Look, I'm back in Jerusalem, and can we meet?" I said, "Sure." And he said, "What about? We want to make a film about the wall. What do you think?" So when I know his approach, and it was about the anniversary of the court, I right away said, "Yes, let's do it." But to be honest with you, if it was now, I would have said no. Not because of Stefan, I really underestimated the project at the beginning. I never dealt with people like the judges and all this big shot and prime ministers and in our business, you would like to call them and do the interview the next day. But these guys, their secretary will answer and said, "Well, in June he have a day." Like, what do you mean in June? But the judges, and they very important people. And by the way, the one you saw in the film, Judge Miron, Judge Miron considered #1 international law expert in the world. He's the one, by the way, who sent Milosevic to jail. The German judge is also one of the top 5 in the world. Now he's mediating between Iran and the United States. And the Jordanian one, he's the former prime minister of Jordan. So deal with all this big ego and, big judges. But at the end, we managed. We get an interview with them. If you notice the archive from the court, there is 28 hours proceeding inside the court. So I have to sit there and listen to 28 hours of legal jumbo mumbo. I really, half of it don't really understand what they're talking about. But thanks to her, she helped a lot, explained a lot of things to me. And since then, I become kind of fascinated with international law and how it works and what it doesn't work. I think I'll stop here, and maybe we'll have some questions from you.
Thank you, Mohammed. So as Mohammed hinted, you were translating international law for Mohammed. And I imagine that you have plenty of interesting anecdotes. But there is maybe one question that I would like to raise with you that is related to one key point highlighted in all the movies, which is the fact that the judges do not put into question the possibility of building a wall. This is not their problem. Their problem is the wall is built on what they say Palestinian land, in the occupied territories. By the way, they do not deal with the issue of what are the positions of Israelis, Palestinians, and Jordanians. Because before being an occupied Palestinian territory is an occupied Jordanian territory. Jordan annexed the West Bank in 1951. The new constitution of 52 is based on the annexation with the agreement of part of the Palestinian elites that agreed about the annexation in 51 in Jericho. So there is one first step, which is an occupied territory. The legitimacy of Jordan in annexating may be put into question because only Great Britain and Pakistan agreed, but it is still, juridically speaking, a Jordanian territory. The Jordanians, when they signed the peace agreement with the Israelis, said, when a peace will exist, we will renounce fully to the land. Now, the issue between Palestinians and Israelis is the Israelis have never recognized their occupation on the fact that these for them are disputed lands. They are dwelling on disputed lands, not on Palestinian lands, which is not false, juridically speaking, because there is no state in the West Bank. The only state was Jordan. So there is an intricacy there in terms of what international law, across national law and international law, can do. Can you open us the eyes? Fix it, please.
Thank you, Riccardo, for the question, and thank you foremost for having us here. Good evening, everybody. My name is Caroline Albermann, and I am really, it's been a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to work with Mohammed and Stefan on the film. Not only because I'm also a former humanitarian, but because I have the pleasure of doing both international law and national law, and I actually in my daily life I see really the big difference between the two systems, we could call them. I had the pleasure of dealing with another occupation situation in the past, meaning the American occupation in Iraq. And you might know that actually as soon as we talk about occupation, I mean, of course it's not only legal considerations coming up, but all the political questions, usually the occupying power would deny that it is occupation, whereas others might definitely contend that it is occupation, or argue that on the legal basis of both the Hague regulations and the Geneva Conventions, occupation is established. So it usually, I mean, we know that problem from the political discussions. We know it from the legal discussions still today, where it is surprising because actually the law is very clear, where it says that occupation is established as soon as there is de facto control by a military power over foreign territory. So actually this is clearly the case in that situation, and this is also why, for example, the UN organs like the Security Council, like the General Assembly, like the ICJ, and other international entities such as the ICRC and other important stakeholders all say that Palestine or the West Bank and Gaza are currently occupied territory. The kind of parallel situation you can have in national law is that a fact might be disputed in court. The fact is, in national law system, you can have the fact, has a car been stolen, yes or no? And then you bring that question to a court, and the court, which is the second level, like says, okay, yes or no, this car has been stolen. If it was stolen, then at the third level, you have the implementation of the judgment, and if the judgment is not immediately followed by the main actors, you might call a bailiff or a marshal or the police to enforce that judgment. The big difficulty we face in international law is that actually you might have a disputed fact, then you have a judicial organ telling you what is the legal view, and then you have an implementation and enforcement question. The good thing about international law is that there is hope, as we heard from Theodore Meron. The bad thing is that international law has by far not developed as much as national law, that we still lack in many instances this enforcement mechanism. We have seen international law develop, for example, in the field of international penal law in the past 20 years, a lot, where there is much better enforcement mechanisms now. You have heard about the ICTY, the ICTR, the ICC, other international tribunals. They are part of this international law enforcement mechanism. There is other enforcement mechanisms which are a little bit weaker, which you might have heard of the monitoring bodies of the United Nations, where states have submitted in the international covenants that states will actually periodically submit reports and an independent United Nations body control if they implement properly international law. But it is of course a weaker enforcement mechanism than putting somebody to jail or than seizing a certain amount of money if a judgment in national law is not being complied with. So I think actually Judge Meron is right in saying there is hope. International law is developing little by little towards having more, giving us more mechanisms. But of course we still lack the whole set of tools which we would like to have. And maybe we will have an opportunity to talk later about Common Article 1 of the Geneva Conventions. Yeah, thank you.
Did you understand anything?
Yeah,
This is law.
exactly. But you made by
I
the
saw somebody nodding all the time.
She's lawyer.
I mean, you made a movie strictly related. You made a movie strictly related to international law, and you seem to have understood very well international law through your movie. Now, I suggest that before deepening some of the elements that you raised, we give the floor to the public for questions. And I think we have a small technical problem for the mics, meaning that may I invite you here? Yes, but we are recording. So, okay, if you ask your question in English, French, Arabic, whatever, then I will repeat it so that can be recorded. Please.
So my name is Mohammed Alatar. I'm a Palestinian. I'm doing my PhD. So my name is Mohammed Alatar. I'm doing my PhD at the Graduate Institute in Economic Development, and I'm also working at the UN.
Speak up, man.
Come here. Come
علي
here.
صوتك رام.
Thank you.
I attended two events today for Palestine. One is interesting, which is this one, and one is the Solidarity Day with the Palestinian at the UN in Geneva. And honestly speaking, it was, for me, I had two comments and one question. So the comment I had is basically at the UN, they kept saying 40 years of this, 70 years of this, 61 years of this, 12 years of blockade for Gaza, and where is the international law? And I had one comment about the movie, which is the Israeli ambassador, when he actually said that
Thanks God.
we will not see justice in this hall, which is actually the same hall that actually gave the state to Israel and did not actually give the state to Palestine, which is a funny thing. And for me, as a Palestinian who also works at the UN, and I live in such an international city like Geneva, I don't see, I do believe actually that there is no hope when, for me as a Palestinian, maybe I will have gray hair, maybe I'll be 80 if I reach 80, but I will not see justice for the Palestinians if I wait for international law to do that. And simply because I saw that 70 years ago, the same institution that gave Israel the state, still struggling to give Palestinians the state, even though with all the reports, with all the, even myself, I write reports about Palestine for UNCTAD, and I don't see that these reports are actually okay. You write the report, it's again another year, you put it on the side, you write another report, but the enforcement, when there would be actually hope for Palestinians that these organizations would actually enforce international. Next.
I suggest we take 2 or 3 questions, after please, and then you answer. No, you will have the time for it.
Will we remember the question?
You forgot? No. You prefer to answer question by question?
I think it's better.
It's better. So, okay, sorry. Sit down.
You know, I have to admit I agree with you. I also don't have much hope of international law. Sorry, Carl. But you know what I have hope with? If you look, I'm not a history student, but I love history. I always read history books. If you look at history, there is no occupation lasted forever. All of them. There is no occupation lasted forever, and the Israeli occupation will be no exception. One day they will be in the garbage can of history, if they like it or not. It will be. You know, I teach course now at Birzeit University. There is really no money in it. It's almost free. But I love it because it becomes to me like a therapy to go and talk to the students. And how much they determine to flip the table. And how much they determine to change the situation. But we have to also be realistic. If you see the amount of pressure on the Palestinian now, it seems like it's almost impossible for us to really think that one day we will be free. I know some of the people in the Palestinian Authority, although I don't agree with them, but if you listen to them and you listen to the amount of pressure, and it's almost physical threat. It's either you go with Trump and his deal of the century, or something else. We don't know what's the something else. But some of them, they've been physically threatened by the Americans, the Israelis, to go with Trump and to go with what's happening. But I don't think there is any Palestinian will ever be able to sign a peace agreement with Israel unless we really, truly free. So I agree with you, international law is not going to bring it to us. It's good to have it on our side and to use it. But I also agree with Judge Bergenthal when he said if they rely on international law, then they have a good reason not to believe it. Yeah. So we can't just rely on international law and stop. We also have to do our homework to really be free.
Yeah, thank you, Mohammed. I'd also like to comment on that question, actually, or on that frustration I hear with regard to the UN not being efficient enough in implementing and enforcing international law. What comes to my mind in that context is actually a very important article which is common to the 4 Geneva Conventions, which is common Article 1, which literally says the high contracting parties undertake to respect and to ensure respect of these conventions under all circumstances. Meaning, they undertake not only to respect, but to ensure respect. It is an obligation on these states, which they have undertaken to abide by, to induce other states which violate international law, to induce them get back on the legal level and abide again by the law or repair violations. And this is also why it's so interesting to see that the legal framework in which the ICJ gave its opinion, which is not a contentious case between two states, which is the classical situation where cases are brought before the ICJ, but it is an advisory opinion. Because, I mean, Israel thought to explore that argument to say that the ICJ is not competent to deal with the case because Israel had not submitted to the jurisdiction. But the court found that the questions submitted to it were not only with regard relevant for Israel and Palestine, but relevant for the international community as a whole. Yes. And this is also what the ICJ then said, that it is relevant both for Israel and the Palestinian people, but it is relevant for the United Nations, and it is relevant for the individual states of the international community. And this is, I think, where this film is very important to trigger maybe a new whole discussion on what could it mean to have other states ensure respect. Thank you.
How do you do that after the lawyer? I just wanted to say for the record, I disagree with Mohammed.
Again.
Well, this is what we do. But only insofar as I think when you go back to Meron, who says we're too emotional.
Yeah.
I think when I was in Palestine, the one thing that I felt very strong about is very often people are too emotional and don't make use of international law. They are, they're there to use the arguments. They're very often not used.
Just for me, I just have a follow-up. For me, there is also the big part of the movie showing Palestine.
If you don't come here, we cannot hear you, and it will not be recorded. Sorry.
I think maybe the first time I wasn't being able to actually deliver what.
Oh, and there was also a UN report which was unfortunately, withdrawn later, that actually says the wall is part of the apartheid regime. I wonder if you asked the judges about this and what did they say?
It's a report of March 2017. What is the apartheid? Is a report by the UN, by UNESCO.
Even before Richard Falk.
Sorry?
Richard Falk, before UNESCO.
No.
When he was, yeah?
Richard Falk wrote the
Before.
report for UNESCO.
Yeah.
I think regarding the apartheid thing, I don't know, it's my own personal opinion, you might not agree with it. But I don't think the situation is apartheid. I think it's a bit worse. Apartheid is to separate two ethnic groups from each other. The wall in Palestine separating Palestinian from Palestinian. It's last month I was having dinner with a friend of mine from East Jerusalem, and he said something to me, it was very interesting. I know he was dating a girl from Ramallah, so I asked him about her and how's things, and he said, well, actually we're not together anymore. I said, why? And he said, well, it's the wall. I said, come on. He said, no, it's really the wall. Because for him, to be in Ramallah, he's illegal. And to take her to Jerusalem, she's illegal. So the wall really now, it's not just separating us politically, it is also separating our hearts. If a Palestinian from East Jerusalem wants to be engaged to a girl from Ramallah, it's a nightmare. It's really a nightmare for both of them. And it's not a good way to start a marriage. Go ahead.
I married a beautiful woman from Jerusalem.
Yeah, but you live in Geneva.
We still managed
10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I was not. I actually agree with Mohammed. I had a ministerial delegation from South Africa coming to us about 6 years ago or so. And we gave them a tour of the West Bank, a humanitarian diplomacy tour. And when they came back in the late afternoon, we asked them how that compares to apartheid. And they said, it's like a kindergarten in South Africa. It is a lot worse, a lot worse. So, just to throw that
Yeah,
in.
if for another question, just like to a footnote, we may have to contextualize the building of the wall. The building of the wall came at a time when Ariel Sharon was prime minister. He had just won the election. And Ariel Sharon, contrary to what says your guy who was in the field building the wall, he was not him. There were two people in charge of the drawing of the wall. It was Sharon directly and his advisor, who is the head, the director, a demographer, the director of the Haifa Security Studies Institute. The two draw where. The reason at the time, in Ariel Sharon's mind, was that he was preparing a swap. I mean, he was maturing the idea of leaving Gaza and having a wall that would constitute the future barrier, the future border, trying to manage a swap in the most the most Palestinian inhabited area in Israel to be swapped with the Israeli legal settlement. Then Sharon got out of play in 2005. He had a stroke. And then the politics changed on that because the wall is not a border anymore. It's just part and parcel of the surveillance, control and colonization system. And it was managed then in another way. And so I think that when you shot the movie is not at the end because the wall is not there and it's not finished yet, but was a particular moment, historically speaking, which was different from 2003-4 when the very Court of Justice was giving his advice. Other questions? Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, or maybe you could clarify for us, in the film there were 2 UN resolutions, General Assembly resolutions that were voted on. And I was wondering if you could clarify what the resolution on each one was for exactly how they differed from each other. And the other question, it's more of a technical thing relating to the cinematography of the film, was the opening shots of Jerusalem. They were beautiful. Was that done by a drone or by what? Thank you.
Yes, the shot was done by drone and it was done by an Israeli filmmaker who was a leftist, and because Palestinian, there is no way you will get a permission to fly drone in Jerusalem. But the Israeli leftists, they always ready to help. In terms of the UN resolution, there was 2 UN resolutions. The first one was to send the case to the court. It was the UN have to meet and decide if they should send the case or not. And you saw the voting, and it's actually very interesting story behind how the vote developed. Actually, for me, was one of the really hardest thing in this film is just how much information and how much do you need to really take out lots of information. I mean, you should see how the EU position was at the UN at that time, because the American, they know it was a historic moment. The Palestinian issue never reached the court. And the American, they know what's going to happen. They know what the court is going to say. And they don't want it to be, they don't want an international court to judge Israel. The second one, after the court issued its opinion, so it went back to the UN, and you saw it was 150 to 6. And 6 was the US and Israel and Marshall Island, and there's 2-3 islands owned by the US, they usually vote with them. But it's basically the whole world. And the debate was that night. The debate lasted for 7 hours. It was a really heated debate when they decided to adopt the resolution.
The resolution was for upholding the court's opinion?
Yes, to uphold the court's opinion.
There was another question by Rania.
Okay, my question will go to Stefan, because you work with UNRWA, and I think the idea to finance such a beautiful film, is it because you know that by building the wall, the Israelis creating like coercive environment to force people to leave? Because before 70 years the Nakba, and now we are this year commemorating the Nakba while the world celebrating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So is it one of the issues the idea came, to finance this film? And my question to the lawyer, I stopped using the word occupation, I use colonization and apartheid. And I use it in the UN, and we have the legal argument for this. Do you think this is wrong? Because it's a system of colonization, in fact.
Actually, to me, I think the answer can be very short. I would still use the word occupation simply because it is used in the legal texts. And I use the wording of the legal text so as to show that I want to apply them.
My memory is fading. The film was made, it's on the webpage as well, the story. It's basically nobody in the international community was interested in measuring the impact of the wall anymore. In 2013, people looked the other way. My students, I don't know what your students' age is, 22, 23, they don't even know there is a wall in Palestine. They're master students of international relations. I mean, that's shocking. So I said, when I walked out of the job that was taken in under, from in under my feet, I said, what do you do when you know more than anybody else about something? Do you just leave it? So I couldn't do that, and I'm not sure I would make this film again for that reason, because it was really undermining everything in my own personal and otherwise life. But I made it, and I'm very happy about it. Thank you.
Thanks to you. Other questions? Yes.
Je parlerai en français, tu traduiras si tu veux bien. Dans le film Mohammed, Caroline et Stéphane, le juge américain dit « Moi j'ai voté contre parce que j'étais sûr que ça ne marcherait pas. » Hein? Je regrette qu'on ne sache pas pourquoi il était sûr que ça ne marcherait pas. Et quelque part, pourquoi depuis si longtemps, aucune des décisions de l'ONU n'est appliquée. Hein, c'est concernant la Palestine. Est-ce que c'est si évident pour lui que parce que les Américains allaient dire non, etc. Ou est-ce qu'il y a une autre explication que vous connaissez? Pourquoi non?
It is because the Americans didn't want to support the advisory point, or for other reasons, since you have met the judge.
I think he was just being true. He was being political. He was not being a legal person. Politically, he knows from the beginning it's going nowhere, because the American will not support it. And something else I learned about this court, it really surprised me, is just how political this court. I mean, these judges, their schedule is loaded, meeting with foreign ministers, with ambassadors, and why do you think they're meeting with them? Actually, Judge Bergenthal, the American judge, he had a dinner with the American ambassador 2 days before they announced the decision. I asked him about it, and he said, I'd rather not talk about it. Okay, so rather than that. But why was the American ambassador meeting with him 2 days before the decision? Yeah. And if you look at his history, he's one of the top in the world in international law. He was the head of the commission in Chile after Pinochet. So he's a very well-known man in international law and human rights. And all legal experts, they kind of puzzle by his position. They don't know why he took that position. Because legally, he really doesn't have a legal argument to support himself. So I would assume there was lots of politics in it. And it's also, he's a Holocaust survivor. He's Jewish. And he wrote a book, it's a bestseller called Lucky Child, about his life in the camp. And I asked him, I said, did the Holocaust play anything in it? He was honest, he said, yes, of course. So I don't think it's just the legal issue. I think there is lots of things it comes into it. I mean, look at also the German judge. You know, the German judge was under so much pressure from the German government to vote against it. And he said it. I mean, actually some of the stuff he said is way more interesting, but we didn't include it because I really don't want to put him in trouble, because he was really just outspoken.
If I may just add something to your question, because actually, I think Judge Bergenthal was somehow realistic. He knew that the implementation of international law depends a lot on political will. And if you look at the available tools to implement and enforce international law, everybody has heard about economic sanctions, everybody has heard about diplomatic sanctions. There is already now a whole set of tools available, which might not sound to be as strong as enforcement under national law. You cannot put a state in jail, and you cannot send a policeman to induce a state which is violating international law to induce that state to get back on the legality level. But I think actually he knew somehow that the international community would struggle to implement that advisory opinion because it is political will to implement it. And I mean, as of today, we still don't have the Security Council dealing with the advisory opinion, although they ought to do something with that.
Exactly. You want to react to that? No. We are coming to the end of the debate because we have to free the room in 10 minutes.
You sleep
as well. How you speak? Sleeping usually. Just to conclude, I also have a question for the three of you, and then please feel free to give your last thoughts or what you would like to express. We have been talking about international law, how it is torn between politics and its own implementation as a juridical tool. I am a political sociologist, and I don't believe that international law will be applied. I think that the value of international law, first of all, is developing the arena of the possibilities and impossibilities. And the political decision makers will use that. So it is according to the political play that international law can have a role. And second, I think the UN cannot be held usually accountable. The UN are not an independent body. They are paid by the states that adhere to it. Have you seen, Trump has decided that UNESCO is pro-Palestinian, we cut the funding. The Palestinians don't want to sit with us, we cut the funding to UNRWA. The Zed Rad al-Hussein is talking too badly against the US, we quit the officer, the human rights, etc., etc. Huh? So, and the UN doesn't have an independent army. The blue helmets never waged war to anybody. So how can you implement? You can't, unless there is an agreement by the political parties concerned. And so maybe the hope that the messages in your movie, which I believe there is a lot to say about that. How do you see all of that? And please, if you want to give your conclusive thoughts, would be nice.
Ladies first.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, if I say I think there should be hope, I also don't want to sound naive. I don't think that the international legal environment will immediately change from one moment to another. But it might change over the years or over the decades. Actually, I think that if you look at the international criminal law, had you told victims of war crimes 40 years ago that one day we would have the International Criminal Court competent to deal with individual cases, provide individual compensation, and send individuals to jail, they wouldn't have believed that 40 years ago. I mean, maybe on the basis of Nuremberg and Tokyo trials, they thought that it might happen one day, but I think if the Justitia, which you have on the film poster, is today holding in one hand the balance and in the other she still cannot hold the sword.
Well, yeah. Well, I suppose having worked almost 20 years in the international humanitarian environment and using advocacy as a tool every day, if the law is not what's implemented, but it gives you an ethical background, it gives you a conscience, and it's easier to talk or have negotiations when you have the law on your side. I think that's a strong tool for on-the-ground negotiation. I'm talking about the UN in New York and so on.
I'm not naive to think really international law is going to set us free. It's not.
Not alone.
But at the same time, I understand it. I understand the value of it. But if you really want my honest opinion, I really, really believe it. I count on you more than I count on international law. International law is not an intellectual system. It's a system of power. There's country behind it. There's lots of interests. There's lots of games work in the UN. I learned so much things that I really don't want to learn, but I have to learn it in this film, about how the international system works. And it's not an intellectual system. It's not. It's really a system of power and interest between big country to decide how they're gonna move. Israel, if right now, imagine this. Imagine if tomorrow the mayor of Geneva will say no one could live in downtown Geneva unless you're Catholic. Protestant. Or Protestant. It would be crazy. But in Jerusalem, this is the law. A Jew could live anywhere he wants in the old city, but no one could live in the Jewish quarter unless you're a Jew. And it's by law. And it's okay. So Israel, and we all know why, it's exception. And it's really above the law. It's not really just, it's really above the law. There is #1 country of United Nations resolution against it is Israel. Implementation, 0. And everything. And we still arguing, is it occupied territory or not? We still arguing with Israel, is it occupied territory or not? And the Security Council announced it in so many different resolutions, the General Assembly, and now the court, and soon the ICC will also announce it, but nothing will happen. So to me, I truly believe it. People like you will make more different than international law. I'm sorry to say it, but that's what I believe.
Thank you.
Thank
you.